Chosen one, there are stories that begin with light, and there are stories that begin with shadows. Yours begins with both, the light of your truth and the shadow of their deception. Someone out there, perhaps still thinking of you right now, could not live without you. But instead of learning how to love you in truth, they built a lie so convincing that even they started to believe it. They lied to your family. They lied to their own reflection. They lied to the universe itself, hoping that if they could manipulate enough narratives, reality would bend to their illusion. They whispered that you were broken, that you were unstable, that you needed to be saved. But they weren't trying to rescue you, they were trying to regain access. You see, your energy was a sanctuary for them. You were their oxygen. Every time you spoke truth, it reminded them of their falseness. Every time you walked in authenticity, it revealed the masks they wore. And when you finally pulled back, when you started protecting your peace, the silence you left behind became too loud for them to bear. They didn't understand that your distance wasn't rejection, it was realignment. You were not running away, you were returning to yourself. But to the ones who fed off your light, that self-return looked like abandonment. It felt like betrayal. Because they had mistaken your energy for their own. They had woven their identity around your compassion, your empathy, your constant willingness to understand. They thought your love was endless because they never imagined a day you'd learn to give it to yourself first. And so, in their desperation, they began constructing a story. A story that painted you as the fallen one and them as the redeemer. They rehearsed their lines before speaking to your family, every word dripping with false concern. "I'm just worried about them," they said. "They're not the same. They're spiraling. I just want to help." But behind the tremble in their voice was calculation. Behind the tears in their eyes was control. They weren't moved by compassion. They were motivated by panic. Because your independence was the death of their illusion. They couldn't stand to see you thriving without them. They couldn't tolerate the sight of you rediscovering joy that didn't come from their approval. So, they created a false emergency, a spiritual siren designed to summon attention, sympathy, and intervention. They ran to the people who knew you by name but never truly knew your soul. They found your family, your foundation, the ones whose opinions could still tug at the strings of your heart. And they said, "I'm here to help." But what they really meant was, "I'm here to reclaim." This is how the universe exposes the difference between saviors and manipulators. Saviors heal quietly. Manipulators create chaos and then arrive pretending to fix it. You were never broken. They just needed you to believe that you were. Because as long as you thought you needed saving, they could keep you small enough to control. As long as you thought you were fragile, they could keep appearing strong. And yet, beneath all their theatrics, something inside you began to awaken. You started feeling the distortion, the subtle dissonance between what they said and what your soul knew. You couldn't explain it, but your spirit recognized the deception long before your mind did. It was that unease in your stomach during conversations that seemed too perfect. That exhaustion that lingered after every encounter. That feeling that you were constantly defending your truth in a story that was never yours to begin with. Chosen one, you have to understand, people like this don't just fear your power, they envy your peace. Your calmness in chaos exposes their inner storms. Your light doesn't just illuminate the room, it reveals what's been hiding in the corners. And when someone has built their identity on control, exposure feels like death. So they lash out, but not with fists, with narratives. They rewrite history to make you the villain and themselves the saint. They create confusion so that your clarity becomes a threat. You were chosen not because life would be easy, but because your soul carries the frequency of truth. And truth, when embodied, becomes unbearable for those who depend on lies. You trigger their guilt by simply existing. You don't have to say a word. Your presence is a mirror that shows them everything they've been avoiding. That's why they tried to distort your reflection in the eyes of others. If they could convince the world that you were broken, they could convince themselves that you were the problem. But divine justice always has perfect timing. The universe doesn't need you to defend yourself, it needs you to stay aligned. Because lies have expiration dates, and truth is immortal. There's a sacred law in motion. Every falsehood spoken against you is returning to its sender multiplied by awareness. Every whisper that carried your name in vain is being dismantled by the evidence of your growth. You don't need to expose anyone. Your peace will. Your glow will. Your elevation will. You are not here to prove you are whole. You are here to remember that you always were. This person thought they could control the narrative by controlling perception. But perception is not power, vibration is. And your vibration has shifted beyond their reach. They thought they could rewrite your story, but you've stepped into authorship. The moment you stopped reacting, you reclaimed the pen. Every boundary you set rewrote the script. Every silence you held became a paragraph of strength. Every tear you cried watered the soil where your new self would rise. And rise you did, even if no one saw the moment it happened. There was a night when you cried yourself to sleep, wondering why people you loved turned against you. That night, angels stood guard. That night, your ancestors whispered, "Don't defend yourself. Ascend yourself." They knew that the lies would dissolve when you stepped fully into truth. They knew that darkness only wins when you try to fight it on its level. So they lifted you. They shifted you. They began cutting cords you didn't even know existed. Now look at where you are. Even in your solitude, you are not alone. Even in your silence, you are not unheard. The universe is echoing your name in rooms where your enemies once plotted. The same people who doubted you are now being confronted by your growth. The same ones who pitied you are realizing that you never needed their sympathy. You were always destined for sovereignty. Chosen one, don't underestimate the magnitude of your healing. When you heal, everything connected to you gets exposed. You didn't just walk away from a toxic person, you broke a generational pattern. You didn't just survive betrayal, you dismantled an energetic contract that was keeping entire lineages bound. You think it's personal, but it's spiritual. You're not just reclaiming your name, you're restoring your bloodline's integrity. That's why the attacks were so relentless. That's why the lies came so heavy. The enemy doesn't waste resources on the ordinary. Only the chosen are tested this way, because your freedom means freedom for many. The one who lied to your family didn't realize they were triggering their own downfall. The energy they weaponized is now turning into evidence. The spell they cast to make others doubt you is now backfiring through divine exposure. And here's the truth that terrifies them most. You still wish them peace. You still release them with grace. Because you understand that holding on to anger keeps you tethered to the very chains you broke. You forgive not because they deserve it, but because you do. You deserve peace that isn't poisoned by their memory. You deserve a life that isn't defined by what they did. You deserve to thrive without looking back. The universe has seen your tears and your restraint. It knows how many times you wanted to respond, to scream the truth, to prove your innocence. But every time you stayed silent, heaven was speaking for you. Every time you didn't retaliate, your energy rose higher. Every time you chose peace, your enemies lost access. That's divine strategy. That's spiritual warfare mastered through surrender. You were never broken, you were being rebuilt. Every misunderstanding was a layer of camouflage protecting your becoming. Every betrayal was a divine reroute to your authenticity. Every loss was sacred space being cleared for abundance. They said you needed saving, but the truth is, they needed your light to survive. And when you pulled it back, they began to fade. Chosen one, you are the lesson they didn't want to learn. You are the truth they tried to silence. You are the mirror that refused to distort. Your existence exposes the spiritual hunger of those who pretend to be full. You carry a frequency they can't fake, purity of heart, clarity of purpose, strength that's gentle yet immovable. You were not designed to fit into their narrative. You were designed to outgrow it. They circle your energy like starving wolves, desperate to feed on the very light they once called dangerous. You were never unstable, you were awakening. The storm they saw within you was the sound of shackles breaking. The chaos they claimed surrounded you was their own reflection, projected onto the mirror of your transformation. Every time you set a boundary, they felt the cage they built around you begin to crack. Every time you chose silence instead of defense, their narratives lost power. Because the thing about truth is that it doesn't need to scream, it simply exists. And your existence, chosen one, became unbearable for those who relied on your confusion to maintain control. They mistook your compassion for weakness. They mistook your forgiveness for dependency. They thought your love was endless because they never imagined a day you'd learn to love yourself with that same devotion. But when you turned that energy inward, when you began nurturing your own soul, they felt the withdrawal like oxygen leaving a room. You see, when you were near, your energy stabilized them. You unknowingly carried them through storms they created. You were the calm in their chaos, the peace in their war, the warmth in their spiritual cold. And when you finally walked away, the temperature dropped. That's when the stories began. The whispers. The concern disguised as pity. They're not doing well, they told others. They're lost without me. But those words were not about you. They were confessions of their own collapse. This person thought they could control the narrative by controlling perception. But perception is not power, vibration is. And your vibration has shifted beyond their reach. They thought they could rewrite your story, but you've stepped into authorship. The moment you stopped reacting, you reclaimed the pen. Every boundary you set rewrote the script. Every silence you held became a paragraph of strength. Every tear you cried watered the soil where your new self would rise. And rise you did, even if no one saw the moment it happened. There was a night when you cried yourself to sleep, wondering why people you loved turned against you. That night, angels stood guard. That night your ancestors whispered, "Don't defend yourself, ascend yourself." They knew that the lies would dissolve when you stepped fully into truth. They knew that darkness only wins when you try to fight it on its level. So they lifted you. They shifted you. They began cutting cords you didn't even know existed. Now look at where you are. Even in your solitude, you are not alone. Even in your silence, you are not unheard. The universe is echoing your name in rooms where your enemies once plotted. The same people who doubted you are now being confronted by your growth. The same ones who pitied you are realizing that you never needed their sympathy. You were always destined for sovereignty. Chosen one, don't underestimate the magnitude of your healing. When you heal, everything connected to you gets exposed. You didn't just walk away from a toxic person, you broke a generational pattern. You didn't just survive betrayal, you dismantled an energetic contract that was keeping entire lineages bound. You think it's personal, but it's spiritual. You're not just reclaiming your name, you're restoring your bloodline's integrity. That's why the attacks were so relentless. That's why the lies came so heavy. The enemy doesn't waste resources on the ordinary. Because they weren't describing your downfall, they were describing their withdrawal symptoms. When you cut off an energetic parasite, it panics. It thrashes. It invents chaos to justify its hunger. They didn't realize that your light was never meant to sustain them indefinitely. You were sent as a lesson, not a lifeline. Chosen one, the people who called you unstable never saw the strength it takes to rebuild yourself after every betrayal. They never saw the silent nights when you cried into your pillow but still woke up and chose love over bitterness. They never saw the spiritual battles you fought behind closed doors, the ones that left no scars on your skin but reshaped your entire soul. They never saw you kneel on your bathroom floor whispering to the universe, "Show me who I am without them," and then rising the next day with more clarity than ever before. They mistook your humility for fragility. They didn't understand that sometimes divine power hides in quiet endurance. That sometimes the strongest souls don't roar, they heal. You were never falling apart. You were falling into alignment. Every crack they pointed out was a doorway opening. Every breakdown was a shedding of illusion. You were never the one who needed saving. You were the one being stripped of everything that kept you from remembering your own divinity. And as you healed, they began to decay. Because their power never came from within, it came from your willingness to hold them up. When you removed your support, they lost balance. The person who called you unstable was leaning on your stability all along. The one who accused you of being lost was navigating life by your inner compass. They thought they were the anchor, but you were the ocean. And without you, their ship began to sink. Now they wander spiritually malnourished, circling your energy like wolves, hungry, restless, and haunted. They scroll through your pages, watch your glow up, study your words, and wonder how you're still standing. They can't comprehend that peace doesn't come from control, it comes from surrender. They can't understand that divine protection doesn't announce itself, it simply surrounds those who are chosen. They're not watching because they care. They're watching because they need evidence that you haven't surpassed them, but you have, effortlessly, silently, gloriously. You've become the reflection that disturbs their comfort. Your healing exposes their stagnation. Your joy dismantles their narratives. You don't need to say a word, your energy is testifying for you. Every time they speak your name with venom, it turns to dust in their mouth. Every lie they tell becomes heavier to carry. Because the universe won't let falsehoods about the chosen ones stand for long. The truth has its own gravity, and it's pulling everything back into balance. They thought walking away from you meant you'd crumble. But instead you bloomed. They expected your silence to be weakness. It became your weapon. They wanted your absence to be your punishment. It became your protection. You see, chosen one, the divine uses isolation as refinement. What they called loneliness was consecration. You were being separated for preservation, removed from what could no longer accompany your evolution. And yet you still bless them with grace. That's what makes you different. Even after the betrayal, you didn't curse them, you released them. You understood that wolves only starve when there's no prey left to feed on. So you stopped being the meal. You stopped explaining. You stopped defending. You stopped proving your worth to those committed to misunderstanding it. Because once you recognize your sacredness, you stop auditioning for belonging. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable in their mediocrity. They may never admit it, but they feel your absence like a haunting. Their health declines, their peace dissipates. Their mind loops through what-ifs and should-haves. They wake up at night with your name echoing in their thoughts, not because you hurt them, but because you healed in a way they didn't expect. You healed without closure, without apology, without needing validation. That kind of healing terrifies those who built their identity around being needed. Your growth is their mirror, and mirrors are merciless to those who hide. The moment you reclaimed your energy, you exposed the emptiness behind their performances. Every time they said, "You'll never make it without me," the universe responded, "Watch." And heaven has been watching ever since, recording, balancing, revealing. You are walking evidence that divine justice doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives as quiet success. Sometimes it looks like glowing skin, clear eyes, deep sleep, and laughter that can't be faked. Sometimes it looks like opportunities aligning without effort, while those who curse you chase things that keep slipping through their hands. Because abundance follows integrity, and deception can only sustain itself on borrowed time. Chosen one, there is a reason you still feel their pulse sometimes. The late-night thoughts, the sudden pang of memory, the faint sense that someone is thinking of you. They are. They're still energetically reaching, trying to tap into the frequency that once healed them. But the access point is gone. You're not on the same frequency anymore. You've ascended beyond their range. You've moved from emotional survival to spiritual sovereignty. And yet, let this understanding fill you with compassion, not pride. Because what you're witnessing is the collapse of codependency. The divine is not punishing them, it's awakening them. The same way pain once awakened you. The same way loss once pushed you toward purpose. Everyone eventually faces the mirror. Everyone must meet the truth they tried to avoid. And you, chosen one, were their mirror. That's why they called you unstable. Because stability felt foreign when you entered the room. You carried too much light for those still living in the dark. So when you hear the echoes of their gossip, when you sense their eyes on you from afar, remember this: their obsession is not power, it's hunger. They're starving for the version of themselves that only existed when they were near your grace. But you are no longer their source. You've become your own well, overflowing from within. You no longer need external validation to feel worthy. You no longer chase love that costs your peace. You no longer accept connections that confuse your spirit. The wolf can circle, but it cannot enter what is divinely sealed. Your energy field is fortified. Your aura has become a fortress built from discernment, prayer, and peace. They may try to mimic your vibration, but imitation is not embodiment. You were forged in fire, they only watched from afar. You earned your wisdom through tears and silence, not manipulation and spectacle. You became what they pretended to be. And that's the ultimate revelation: That stability isn't about control, it's about surrender. That peace doesn't come from people staying, but from you staying true. That salvation doesn't come from being saved, but from remembering you were never lost. So lift your head, chosen one. You have outgrown the narratives that once confined you. Let them call you whatever they need to justify their own pain. Let them circle. Let them watch. Because while they orbit around your energy, you are ascending to realms they can't access. You are stepping into divine purpose while they chase echoes of what used to be. You are living proof that no lie can survive in the presence of awakening. And one day, they will see it. The truth will rise so high it won't need words, only light. The wolf will grow weary, the liar will grow silent, and your name will shine untarnished. Because stability was never something you lost, it was something they feared you'd find. And now you have. You are the calm after every storm they sent. You are the proof that divine alignment is louder than accusation. You are the peace that outlasts every false prophecy. And as they circle, desperate for a glimpse of what they can no longer reach, the universe whispers one final truth into your spirit. They said you needed saving, but all along, it was they who needed you to survive. That isolation you've been feeling, the quiet that feels heavy, the distance that feels like exile, was never punishment. It was placement. It was divine recalibration. Every silence that stung, every absence that echoed louder than words, every unanswered call, it was sacred design. You thought you were being abandoned, but in truth, you were being pulled out of reach. The universe was not rejecting you. It was shielding you. It was starving the leeches that fed off your light. It was cutting the cords they once used to siphon your strength. You were never alone, you were being hidden in plain sight, tucked away in divine quarantine while heaven restructured your destiny. Because the truth is, your energy was too rare to remain accessible. Too many hands reached for what they didn't understand. Too many eyes watched you not with love, but with longing for what they could never become. The divine saw it, the constant giving, the unreciprocated love, the unseen warfare that drained your spirit day after day. And so, isolation became your medicine. The silence became your surgery. Every delay, every closed door, every sudden ending, it was an angel in disguise, severing invisible threads that bound you to cycles you'd already outgrown. You mistook the stillness for loneliness, but really it was sacred stillness, the kind that precedes revelation. The universe had to empty your space before it could refill it with what aligns. It had to clear out the echoes of counterfeit connections, the residue of false loyalty, the lingering fingerprints of those who only touched you to take. The divine knows what you didn't. That protection often feels like loss before it reveals itself as grace. So when everything and everyone began to fall away, when familiar faces grew distant, when people you would have died for stopped calling, it wasn't betrayal, it was divine intervention. There's a kind of isolation that doesn't cage you, it crowns you. The kind that doesn't trap you, but trains you. You are in that season. You were removed, not rejected. Hidden, not forgotten. The universe had to dim your visibility to recalibrate your vibration. It had to mute the noise so you could hear your own voice again, your divine frequency that got buried beneath people-pleasing and pain. You were too busy carrying others through storms that weren't yours to notice how drenched you'd become. Now, in the quiet, you're learning to dry yourself off. You're remembering what it means to exist without performing. You're learning that solitude is not the absence of love, but the presence of power. Look closely, chosen one. Isolation is the cocoon before flight. The divine stripped away the audience so you could meet the actor behind your old mask. You weren't meant to be accessible to everyone anymore. You were meant to ascend. And ascension requires silence. It requires distance from distractions that distort your discernment. The universe had to starve the energies that thrived on your availability. Those who only called when they needed healing, only appeared when they needed validation, only stayed when you made them feel significant. The divine saw how they mistook your kindness for permission, how they feasted on your empathy like it was endless. And heaven said no more? So it took your phone calls and turned them into prayers. It replaced your conversations with contemplation. It took your social circles and replaced them with spiritual ones. Ancestors whispering, angels guarding, intuition sharpening. Every plan that fell through, every invitation that disappeared, every person that ghosted you, all of it was divinely orchestrated to create this silence, this sacred room where your soul could breathe again. You are not lonely, you are in spiritual surgery. The universe is stitching your energy back together where others tore it apart. The pain you feel when you remember those you lost is not emptiness, it's detox. You're purging emotional toxins that once felt like home. That's why some days feel like grieving and healing at the same time. You're not going backward, you're being rewired. The version of you that tolerated depletion is gone, and the divine refuses to let you resurrect what it buried. And yes, isolation will test you. You will question your worth. You will crave familiar chaos just to feel connection. But every time you resist that urge to go back, you're declaring your spiritual maturity. You're saying, I choose peace over presence. I choose destiny over dependency. The divine takes note of that. Every time you choose silence over proving yourself, every time you choose to stay still when your ego wants to chase validation, your frequency rises. Because the divine knows, before it can crown you, it must clear you. Before it can bless you, it must blind you to distractions. Before it can bring your next assignment, it must test your ability to stand alone. So it isolates you to show you the truth, that your connection to Source was never dependent on human approval. That you were always your own healer, your own light, your own validation. When you finally surrender to that truth, isolation transforms. It stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like preparation. The silence becomes golden. The solitude becomes sacred. You begin to crave your own company, not out of bitterness, but out of recognition. You realize how safe you are within yourself. How the divine in you was always the home you were searching for in others. And then, one day, when you least expect it, the same universe that pulled everyone away will begin to send new souls your way. But this time, you'll see the difference. You'll no longer attract what drains, you'll magnetize what pours. You'll no longer entertain what confuses, you'll align with what confirms. The divine isn't punishing you by keeping you alone, it's refining you to receive what you once settled for losing. So when the silence stretches longer than you expected, whisper to yourself, I am being protected. When the loneliness aches, remember, this is the pruning before blooming. You are not being forgotten, you are being fortified. Heaven doesn't isolate the weak, it separates the anointed. You are not in exile, you are in evolution. The cords that once strained you are gone because your energy now belongs to purpose. And when the divine finishes its work, you'll emerge untouchable, no longer starving for love, but overflowing with it. This is your sanctuary season. Stay still. Stay sacred. The isolation that once scared you is now the bridge to your divine inheritance. The universe is cutting the cords, yes, but it's also tying new ones to your higher self, your ancestors, your purpose. You are not being starved, you are being purified. The silence isn't empty, it's pregnant with everything you prayed for just when your breakthrough was drawing near, when the air around you began to shift, when your spirit started to feel lighter, when the light at the edge of your struggle started to flicker into view. That's when they appeared again. The same person. The same energy. The same story they've always told, only this time, it wore a different mask. You felt it before you saw it. The old vibration resurfacing, the familiar unease creeping through your peace. They could no longer reach you directly, so they found another way. They went through the people who still had a piece of your heart, the ones you'd never expect to be used as messengers of manipulation. Because when your elevation began, they panicked. They saw you pulling away not in anger, but in evolution. They felt your detachment not as rejection, but as revelation, that they no longer had power. You had broken the energetic contract. The hooks they once used to reel you back had rusted in your awakening. But desperate souls don't give up easily, they adapt. They couldn't touch your peace head-on, so they reached for the people who could, those who knew your story, your softness, your sacred loyalty. The family members who meant well but couldn't discern the difference between genuine concern and spiritual infiltration. You were on the verge of something divine. A breakthrough that was not just physical, but ancestral. The kind that shifts bloodlines, breaks generational patterns, frees what's been bound for decades. That kind of transformation doesn't go unnoticed in the spiritual realm. The closer you get to destiny, the louder distractions become. The same person who drained you saw your transformation as a threat, not because they hated you. Before it can bless you, it must blind you to distractions. Before it can bring your next assignment, it must test your ability to stand alone. So it isolates you to show you the truth, that your connection to Source was never dependent on human approval. That you were always your own healer, your own light, your own validation. When you finally surrender to that truth, isolation transforms. It stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like preparation. The silence becomes golden. The solitude becomes sacred. You begin to crave your own company, not out of bitterness, but out of recognition. You realize how safe you are within yourself. How the divine in you was always the home you were searching for in others. And then, one day, when you least expect it, the same universe that pulled everyone away will begin to send new souls your way. But this time, you'll see the difference. You'll no longer attract what drains, you'll magnetize what pours. You'll no longer entertain what confuses, you'll align with what confirms. The divine isn't punishing you by keeping you alone, it's refining you to receive what you once settled for losing. So when the silence stretches longer than you expected, whisper to yourself, I am being protected. When the loneliness aches, remember, this is the pruning before blooming. You are not being forgotten, you are being fortified. Heaven doesn't isolate the weak, it separates the anointed. You are not in exile, you are in evolution. The cords that once drained you are gone because your energy now belongs to purpose. And when the divine finishes its work, you'll emerge untouchable, no longer starving for love, but overflowing with it. This is your sanctuary season. Stay still. Stay sacred. The isolation that once scared you is now the bridge to your divine inheritance. The universe is cutting the cords, yes, but it's also tying new ones to your higher self, your ancestors, your purpose. Because you understood something crucial, they had to go through someone else because they could no longer go through you. The divine orchestrated this encounter not to test your pain, but to confirm your growth. This wasn't a setback, it was a measurement. Heaven was showing you how much power you've reclaimed. Once you would have folded at the sound of their name. Once your heart would have raced, your peace would have shattered, and your boundaries would have dissolved. But now you breathe through it. You let the emotion pass without attachment. You understand that manipulation requires permission, and you no longer give it. You see, spiritual warfare doesn't always come in the form of conflict. Sometimes it comes disguised as compassion. The enemy doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through familiar voices. It says things like, "They just want to talk," or "Maybe they've changed," or "Family should forgive." But you've learned that forgiveness and access are not the same thing. You've learned that closure is not a reunion, it's a revelation. And the divine has been revealing, piece by piece, who was truly sent to heal you and who was sent to hinder you. When they went to your family, they weren't just trying to manipulate. They were trying to rewrite the narrative. They wanted to be seen as the savior again, the one who cares enough to try. But their actions betrayed them. The timing gave them away. They showed up not when you were broken, but when you were blossoming. Not when you were struggling, but when you were finally at peace. Because their need for control was never about love, it was about proximity to your power. Your energy was their lifeline, and your absence forced them to confront the emptiness they'd been masking with manipulation. So they reached out in desperation, hoping to reel you back through the same emotional channels they once used to drain you. But this time, divine protection stood in their way. Every attempt they made to twist the story began to unravel. Every word they spoke carried an energetic weight that revealed itself in time. The universe began to expose motives without you lifting a finger. Conversations that once confused your family began to make sense. The masks they wore started to crack. And you, the chosen one, didn't need to defend yourself. You simply kept walking. Because your breakthrough didn't require explanation, it required separation. The divine was already working behind the scenes, aligning truth with timing. You didn't need to prove your integrity. The energy of your peace did it for you. You didn't need to convince anyone of who you are. Your fruit spoke louder than their words. This moment, this reemergence of old energy, was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to verify you. To prove that your healing wasn't surface level. To show that your boundaries are now sacred, your intuition sharper, your spirit untouchable. The divine allowed them to reappear not as a setback, but as confirmation, the same test, different response. You've outgrown the loop. You've mastered the pattern. And in that mastery, you reclaimed something eternal, your peace. The kind that can't be stolen, manipulated, or negotiated. Because now you know, not every hand that reaches for you deserves to hold you. Not every voice that calls your name deserves an answer. Not every return is a reunion. Some are just spiritual audits to confirm your evolution. So when they came through your family, when they tried to sneak past your boundaries disguised as concern, you stood in your truth. You understood that love doesn't demand access. it respects distance. You learn that protecting your energy is not pride, it's purpose. You saw clearly that their reappearance was not about reconciliation, but about relevance. They couldn't stand being erased from your narrative, so they tried to write themselves back in. But this story belongs to the divine now. Your breakthrough was not delayed, it was defined. This was the moment heaven said, "See? They can no longer reach you unless you allow it." The energy that once consumed you now has no authority. The manipulation that once controlled you now falls flat. The same story that used to haunt you now only confirms how far you've come. Chosen one, don't look back. Don't explain. Don't reopen doors that divinity sealed for your protection. The same God, the same universe that hid you in isolation, is now revealing the truth publicly. Everything that was meant to confuse you is clarifying itself. Every alliance formed against you will dissolve in divine timing. You don't have to fight for your peace, you've already earned it. So when they show up again, when the old energy tries to slip through cracks disguised as care, smile softly and stay still. Because you know something they don't. You're no longer reachable through the channels they used to control. The divine rerouted your path, redirected your spirit, and reclaimed your destiny. You are beyond their reach now. The breakthrough is still yours. The interference only proved how close you were to the light, and how untouchable you've become within it. It wasn't a random visit. It was never coincidence. It was calculated, deliberate, a movement born from desperation and fear. Two people who shared nothing but a wound, you. The common denominator between their insecurities, their hidden frustrations, their inability to control what they never created. One driven by obsession, the other by power. One by heartbreak, the other by pride. They found each other in their shared disbelief that you could live, and thrive, without them. That was their bond. That was the silent thread that stitched their alliance together. This wasn't about reconciliation, it was about control. The scorned one missed your energy, the rush of being near your light. The family member missed the authority, the subtle influence they once held over your choices. Both of them were addicted, one to your presence, the other to your dependence. And when your distance cut their supply, they panicked. They convinced themselves they were saving you, but deep down, they were just saving their access. They bonded over your independence like it was a shared enemy. The conversation didn't start with love, it started with fear. Fear of what you could become if left unchecked. Fear of how powerful you'd be if you no longer needed permission to exist. Fear that your peace would prove they were never your source. You were outgrowing their narrative, and for people built on control, that's equivalent to death. The meeting didn't take place in a public space. No, this was private, sacred to their agenda. The air thick with pretense, the energy buzzing with ego masked as concern. Words like help and healing were thrown around, but every syllable carried the weight of manipulation. They spoke about you as if you were an assignment. As if your soul was something that could be debated, dissected, or redirected. And in that conversation, a pact was formed, not signed with ink, but sealed with intention. One promised to handle the emotional realm, to play the victim, to weave sympathy through every story, to make the world see you as broken. The other promised to handle the spiritual realm, to send words, energy, and influence in ways that could tilt perception, sway opinion, or cloud intuition. It was strategy, cloaked in compassion. A performance designed to make them both feel powerful again. Because that's what your awakening did. It shattered illusions. It removed every false sense of superiority that people had built around your compliance. Your silence exposed them. Your detachment mirrored their emptiness. And your peace became the proof that their power was never real. It was borrowed, sustained only by your participation. They didn't just fear your freedom, they resented it. It made them question why their lives hadn't changed. Why your glow seemed brighter while they remained stuck. Why your clarity grew while their confusion deepened. It wasn't jealousy of your possessions, it was envy of your peace. You carried something they couldn't manufacture, divine alignment. The kind of stillness that can't be bought, taught, or controlled. So they joined forces? Two wounded souls, building an alliance not from love, but from lack. They told themselves it was righteousness that they were helping you see the truth, but the truth they spoke of was only their own fear reflected back. They couldn't admit that your independence threatened their identity. Because who were they without your chaos? Who were they if they weren't needed? The scorned one began to speak your name in circles of sympathy, narrating a false story about your downfall. They've changed, they're lost, they're making bad choices. Each phrase was carefully selected to sound like concern but feel like condemnation. And your family member echoed those words, amplifying them through networks that had once loved you. They repeated those stories until they started to believe them. Because believing the lie was easier than facing the truth, that you had grown beyond their understanding. Your awakening was never meant to please anyone, it was meant to free you. But to those who built their power on your submission, freedom looks like rebellion. Your distance looks like danger. Your peace looks like pride. And so, they called it intervention. They called it care. But what it really was a spiritual attempt to reclaim ownership over a soul that no longer belonged to them. You see, chosen one, not every alliance is built in darkness. Some are formed in daylight, with smiles and shared tears. Manipulation doesn't always wear a mask, sometimes it wears sincerity. But energy never lies. Behind every "we're just worried about you," there was a vibration of fear. Behind every "they're not the same anymore," there was a hint of envy. And behind every "we just want them back," there was a quiet confession: we missed the control. The divine watched silently as they built their plan. Heaven wasn't sleeping, it was documenting. Every word, every thought, every intention recorded in the vibration of time itself. Because this wasn't just an emotional betrayal, it was a spiritual conspiracy. Two souls uniting not to heal you, but to hinder you. Yet what they didn't understand was this: you cannot curse what is covered. You cannot block what is chosen. You cannot undo what was written before their existence. While they were busy plotting, divine justice was already unfolding. The same energy that used to bind you became the very rope that tied their peace in knots. Every manipulation returned to sender. Every false story began to crumble under the weight of truth. The universe doesn't punish, it mirrors. And what they projected toward you began to echo back into their own lives. Your awakening wasn't their downfall, their refusal to evolve was. Your freedom didn't end their power, it exposed its illusion. The control they thought they had was never real, it was borrowed from your unawareness. Once you remembered who you were, the contract dissolved. The leash snapped. The illusion shattered. Now they linger in confusion, wondering how their alliance failed. How the two of them, so sure of their righteousness, could end up powerless. The truth is simple: they united through fear, not love. And anything built on fear eventually feeds on itself. Their shared obsession has become their shared decay. They're haunted not by your rejection, but by your absence. Because without you, their story has no direction, their energy no source. You stand now as proof that divine isolation isn't punishment, it's preservation. That solitude wasn't loneliness, it was strategy. You were being separated not because you were weak, but because you were sacred. The divine pulled you out of their reach to starve the parasites of your light. And now, chosen one, the tables have turned. The ones who thought they were saving you are the ones who need saving. The ones who claimed you were unstable are the ones unraveling in silence. The ones who built alliances against your awakening are now discovering what happens when you make pacts against purpose. Everything collapses. So let them watch. Let them whisper. Let them wonder how you keep shining despite their schemes. Because what they'll never grasp is this: your freedom wasn't rebellion, it was prophecy. Your awakening wasn't arrogance, it was divine remembrance. And their fear of your independence was never about you being out of control, it was about them losing control. They thought they formed an alliance to reclaim you. But what they really did was expose themselves to the light. And light, chosen one, never loses. It only reveals.